Hello and welcome to another episode here in the capture part of the texture series. And today I want to go on set here to an area where we want to capture maybe this small part here. And I have chosen this, of course, based on the lighting situation that I have here, not on the very interesting part of the texture that's rather boring. But if we need exactly this, it's maybe exactly what we want. Again, the lighting is here the main part for this part of the capture series, and I want to explore some thoughts with you. Of course, it's not the most complicated situation, but it's shadow and you can see it's a little bit bluish here. This is shot just for the overview. Okay, let's get started. The first thing that I want to discuss is, of course, here the lens grid. It's pretty straight, and that means we can use the lens that we have chosen for this project as it is. And my suggestion is not just to go too picky with it, especially with such organic shaped textures where we really can't measure if they are distorted or not. The main idea here is to have the preference on the quality of the image, and that means in the moment I check here just the profile for this lens, for the 135mm lens, then I can see not only that all these little checker boxes move, also the pixels here move a lot. And I do this now a little bit back and forth so you can see the change, and that is a change in the sub-pixel dimension. That means any pixel that moves only a value below 1 or always a fraction of a pixel value will be mixed with the neighbors. And that means we get something that is more blurry. So the quality is here my main concern. Not so much with this lens where I really can't see on the end if it is distorted or not. So I leave this here completely unchecked, and we have no problems here with color fringing or chromatic aberration, and that leaves this part here completely alone. This is fine with me. I know this lens and I know I can work with it. If it is much more distorted, and I will do this here just for the sake of demonstration, when I go here to manual, then I can see here that I can destroy here maybe the image. This would be completely unacceptable, as would be this case here. This is overdone just to make the point where we are with our idea here. This is very nice. So let's go to the next one, and that handles here now the camera. And I can see here my first thing, and that is very important to me, that the camera is leveled. This was shot here, of course, way after the shooting, just to capture all the parts here. I have even a different lens here already on the camera. But in the moment we level the camera here in the view axis, we can say that when we looked through the viewfinder, that exactly in the middle should be the middle of our texture. And then we have already established an horizontal way if the texture is vertically. So we get something that works for our idea that we shoot orthographical or perpendicular to a flat surface. I have here also a remote control on it, and with a longer lens this is certainly something that I would suggest, because just tapping the exposure button or the release button will give a little shake, and this is with high megapixel cameras always in the sub-pixel area, and that limits your quality as well. So everything should be a little bit stable here. That means very fat and not really impressed by any movements or power to the camera. Anyway, I like to have at least a remote control for this. So, and when we have the camera so far discussed, of course we need to know the distance from the texture to the camera, and I use this little icon here. This straight line here symbolizes the area where the sensor sits, and that's pretty much the standard where you take measurements on set from. Not from the front lens or from anything where the tripod was or the nodal point or anything else. It's this sign. This makes everything equal, and so you can check even a different camera, a different lens, whatever. this is a fixed point for every camera, and so you can take the measurements and everyone knows what's going on. Having said anything about the distance, it was 15 feet, and speaking of measurements and set survey, I have overdone it here a little bit, and of course I have failed finally because I have everything focused on the wall and not on the area where I wanted to have it. But if you forgive me my little sloppiness, because it was only to capture a little information about the surrounding scene for you. It has nothing to do with the texture capturing finally. So what we can see here is we have a very bright sun, but everything here is in a shadow. So we get a lot of bluish light from the sky in the shadows, but as well from the concrete here, a very warmish tone. Now one could argue, if we had a good luck, we can mixture this bluish tone and the warmish concrete to something that might work very well in this scene to have the function of a fill light. Maybe that works, maybe not, we don't know. But the truth is, the sunlight is normally the most stable light when it's just clear and like here around noonish. And I want to have this light, of course, so what's to do? I have done some experiments, of course, because I don't know all the time what is the best solution. So I switch here to my first test, and I was absolutely certain that I wouldn't use it from the start, but I want to show you what happens when you use the silver part of the big reflector and when you use it from an unusual point of view, that means from the floor. And as we normally have a similar light situation in the scene, I assume, that might vary of course in your case, but any light from the floor gives an impression that might not work, and in this case it's just too bright, and you can see here it's not bright enough here. So we have a little spot here, a little hot spot in the middle, and that is typically for these silvery reflectors. They work very strongly but not very efficiently for the light that we need here finally. After that I tried this method here where I use a white reflector, which gives a very diffuse light, and that worked already much better, but I was not really satisfied with that. It was not strong enough, and I don't know, it's sometimes just that you get used to a scene and you see already, is it working or not. If I had no time at all, I would go with this method if I couldn't go further, and of course I went further, and I want to show you that. And I have used here, of course, a version where everything is a little bit dark to show you how bright this light was. So I took with the silver reflector the light from the sun, very high with no shadows, and bounced it here on a diffuser. And this diffuser is like a silky fabric, what you normally use for parachutes or so. Every light that goes in gets nicely diffused, and there's only one downside. If you need to shoot for HDRI, you have to keep it very, very stable here, because any movement here will change the light, and any change in light will finally recognized by the application as ghosting. And when you press then, for example in Adobe, the ghosting button, then it screws up big times. There's no way to get it finally back. So there is kind of problem in this solution if you need to shoot, but as we will see, that was not needed at all. One exposure was quite enough. Speaking of one exposure, just to make my point, and I know I repeat myself here, if you have no color chart like this one here, and you have the need to have linearized material, then at least shoot 3 or perhaps 5 exposures from the same area with different brightnesses. Then the algorithm of the HDRI application can take out the camera response curve. If you have the luxury that this texture here fits into one exposure without any adjustments here, for example in the curve or so, which is prohibited for reproductive texture photography, of course, then the card will give you here everything that you need. And this is of course very important, that the light that you produce here hits this card, that the card is not way in front of the whole situation. Always have an eye on the chain reaction that you do when you change the light. The card placed originally in a very nice place might be wrong when you change the light situation, which I did here. And then we can take finally our shot and of course take then the color checker out. I have it here on a C stand. That means I can just swap it out and bring it in on the same position again. And here we can see this is a light that doesn't fill the whole histogram here. So I have a lot of space, and that is pretty healthy from my point of view, especially in the darks where I normally suspect if we have some noise, then it resides here. And here the highlights, of course, I think some of them are here. I can't make them visible, but you can believe me, this is not a big deal here. It's more likely that this is that area. And of course, perhaps this white checkerboard here. When I put it out, this is a nice texture, and when I take then my color profile from this later on, I will see that this will look very natural. And this closes already the chapter and or the episode, and I want to make certain, of course, this is a nice variety of tone values. We have here a relatively gray texture in the scene. That means R, G and B are lying pretty much on top of each other, and so we can estimate that this could be correctly done. Of course, we have to measure our gray point and later on in the post-production, and that is then in part 3 of the whole series. So see you for another capture session soon. Thanks for listening. Have fun with it. Bye bye.